The Amazon is burning, consumed by fire. Deforestation hit its highest rate in a decade. Scientists warn of irreversible collapse. The world is watching Brazil. Brazil already heard all of this before. In the 1980s, the Amazon was disappearing. By the 2000s, it was actually being saved. Deforestation dropped 70%, the lowest rate ever recorded. Brazil had cracked the code, protecting the rainforest while growing one of the most powerful agricultural economies on Earth. Then, deliberately and systematically, they chose to undo it. This isn't a story about negligence. It isn't about poverty or lack of resources or scientific ignorance. Every person involved knows exactly what the Amazon is worth. They know what losing it means. For Brazil, for the planet, they chose profit anyway. And this is the story of how the most important forest on Earth was saved, surrendered, and why the clock to save it again is almost out of time. The Amazon rainforest covers nearly 7 million square kilometers. It is almost as large as the contiguous United States. And most people understand, in a general way, that it matters. But the actual mechanics of why, the specific ways the Amazon keeps the planet functional, are far more alarming than the headlines suggest. Start with water. The Amazon doesn't just sit inside the water cycle, it drives it. About 45% of the moisture that travels inland from the Atlantic Ocean gets recycled by the rainforest and released back into the atmosphere. That water vapor then travels south, feeding more than 50% of the rainfall across South America's tropical savanna. Farms in Argentina, rivers in Paraguay, even cities in southern Brazil. They all depend on a forest most of their citizens have never seen. Lose the Amazon, and you don't just lose the Amazon. You lose the rainfall systems that feed an entire continent. Then there's carbon. The Amazon stores hundreds of billions of tons of it, locked inside trees, soil, and root systems built over millions of years. A standing forest pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but the southeastern Amazon has already crossed a line. It is now releasing more carbon than it absorbs. A forest that spent millennia cleaning the atmosphere has started poisoning it. And then there's biodiversity. Roughly half of all species on Earth live in tropical rainforests. The Amazon alone contains more tree species in a single hectare than exist across all of Europe. None of this is abstract. It is measurable, documented, and accelerating. Scientists have identified the threshold. If deforestation reaches 20 to 25% of the Amazon's total area, combined with global warming approaching 2 degrees Celsius, the forest crosses a tipping point it cannot recover from. Today, approximately 18% has already been deforested. Degradation pushes the effective figure closer to 30%. The margin is not wide, and it is shrinking. Here is the part of the story that most coverage skips. Brazil solved this problem before. In the 1970s, Brazil's military government opened the Amazon to development. They built the Trans-Amazonian Highway, offered free land to settlers, and paid Brazilians to move deep into the rainforest. A land rush followed. Settlers cleared forest, raised cattle, and when the land was exhausted, seized more. Between 1978 and 1988, over 20,000 square kilometers were cut down every single year. Then came soy. Global meat consumption rose, demand for animal feed rose with it, and Brazil became the world's soy capital. By the early 2000s, massive soy farms were swallowing former pastures, pushing cattle ranchers further into uncleared forest. The arc of deforestation expanded north. The rate of destruction was unprecedented. And then Brazil did something remarkable. It stopped. In 2003, under President Lula da Silva, Environment Minister Marina Silva built a plan from scratch. Protected areas were expanded. Indigenous land was demarcated. The forest code was strengthened, limiting how much private landowners could clear. IBAMA, Brazil's environmental enforcement agency, was funded and deployed. Illegal clearing was tracked, fined, and prosecuted. In 2006, major food companies signed the soy moratorium. They agreed not to purchase soy grown on newly deforested land. 3 years later, beef companies followed. International funding supported conservation efforts. The system worked because every lever was pulled simultaneously: law enforcement, industry pressure, and economic incentive. By 2012, deforestation had dropped by more than 70%, the lowest rate since records began. Brazil's beef and soy industries continue to grow, using more efficient techniques on existing land rather than clearing new forest. This was not an accident, it was policy, deliberate, coordinated, and effective, which makes everything that happened next not a failure of knowledge. It was a failure of will. The people who wanted the Amazon open for business never went away. They organized. The ruralistas, a bloc of conservative politicians representing Brazil's agricultural industry, had held about 17% of congressional seats in the early 2000s. By 2012, they controlled nearly 30%. By 2018, 44%. That's not a fringe movement. That is a structural takeover of the legislative branch built over 2 decades, funded by the industries that profit most directly from deforestation. They used that power methodically. In 2012, they pressured President Dilma Rousseff into weakening the forest code, allowing landowners to clear more of their private land legally. In 2016, they pushed President Michel Temer to slash IBAMA's budget, gutting the agency responsible for catching and fining illegal deforesters. That same year, a law passed making it easier for people who had illegally seized Amazon land to keep it. The message to the forest floor was immediate and clear: clearing pays, and the consequences are shrinking. Then came Bolsonaro. Elected in 2018 with ruralista support, he moved fast. On his second day in office, he transferred the Forest Service, the agency that monitors the forest code, out of the Environmental Ministry and into the Agricultural Ministry, run by a ruralista ally. The Environmental Ministry itself was systematically hollowed out. Enforcement collapsed. The president was directly accused of introducing policies that encouraged burning to clear land for agriculture. After weeks of international condemnation, the government responded. The environment minister announced efforts to combat illegal environmental crimes. But on the ground, agents were arriving only to issue fines, not to fight fires. Farmers were left alone. The military was deployed for 1 month, while thousands of fires burned across some of the most remote terrain on the continent. In 2019, over 30,000 fires burned in the Amazon in August alone, 3 times the number from the year before. The forest didn't catch fire by accident, it was abandoned on purpose. To understand why the Amazon keeps losing, follow the money. 90% of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is directly linked to cattle ranching. Not logging, not mining, not urban expansion. Cattle. Brazil is the world's second largest beef producer, and the economics of that industry create a logic that is brutally simple. Clear the forest, plant grass, graze cattle, sell beef. Each step is profitable. The destruction is the business model, but the damage doesn't stop at the tree line. Livestock is responsible for approximately 55% of Brazil's total greenhouse gas emissions. Combining the carbon released by deforestation with the methane produced by the cattle themselves, roughly 70% of what would be Brazil's fossil fuel equivalent emissions come not from burning oil or gas, but from land use change. Brazil is one of the world's largest agricultural exporters, and a majority of what it exports is built on a foundation of converted rainforest. Soy plays a supporting role. Most Brazilian soy is not eaten by people. It is fed to farmed animals, largely in Europe and China. So when European consumers eat chicken or pork, a portion of the land cost for that meal is paid by the Amazon. The soy moratorium of 2006 and the beef agreements that followed did slow the direct link between commodity production and new deforestation. But enforcement has weakened. Monitoring has gaps, and the global demand for Brazilian beef and soy has only grown. The result is a system where international markets consume the products, Brazil's agricultural sector captures the profit, and the Amazon absorbs the cost. Individual farmers are not villains in a vacuum. They are responding rationally to a set of incentives that makes destruction more rewarding than conservation. Until those incentives change, through policy, enforcement, or market pressure, the chainsaw follows the money. And right now, the money still points into the forest. In 1990, a Brazilian scientist named Carlos Nobre published a paper warning that continued deforestation would push the Amazon past a point of no return. The scientific community largely ignored it. That was 35 years ago. He wasn't wrong, he was early. Today, Nobre is one of the world's leading climatologists, a senior researcher at the University of São Paulo, a lead author on the IPCC reports that shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, and co-chair of the scientific panel for the Amazon. For decades, he has been saying the same thing, with increasing urgency, as the data has moved consistently in one direction. The dry season in the southern Amazon is now 4 to 5 weeks longer than it was 45 years ago. One additional week per decade, every decade, without interruption. What was once a 3 to 4 month dry season now stretches to 4 to 5 months, running 20 to 30% drier and 2 to 3 degrees warmer than historical averages. Tree mortality in these regions has increased significantly. The southeastern Amazon, the portion closest to Brazil's agricultural heartland, has already crossed its own internal threshold. It is no longer a carbon sink, it is a carbon source. The forest is releasing more CO2 than it absorbs. A system that spent millions of years stabilizing the atmosphere has begun working in reverse. If current deforestation and warming trends continue, Nobre projects the Amazon crosses its full tipping point by 2040. By the end of this century, up to 70% of the rainforest could be gone. Yet the carbon released, more than 250 billion tons of CO2, would make it functionally impossible to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the collapse would not stop at the forest's edge. The rainfall systems feeding South America's tropical savanna would fail with it. 35 years after the first warning, the timeline is no longer generational. It is within a single human lifetime, possibly within yours. The science is not in dispute, the solution is not a mystery, and the precedent already exists. Brazil demonstrated between 2004 and 2012 that it is entirely possible to reduce deforestation dramatically while maintaining and growing one of the most productive agricultural economies in the world. That wasn't a theory. It happened. The tools are known. The policies are documented. The results were measured. And the question now is whether the political will exists to repeat it. There are reasons for cautious optimism. Lula returned to the presidency in 2023 with an explicit commitment to zero deforestation by 2030. Early data shows deforestation rates have slowed compared to the Bolsonaro years. At COP30, held in Belém, on the edge of the Amazon itself, countries agreed to a roadmap targeting zero deforestation across tropical forests by 2030. It is an agreement. Whether it becomes action depends entirely on enforcement. The economic alternative is more viable than the agricultural lobby admits. Brazil currently runs livestock across approximately 3.2 million square kilometers. Regenerative livestock practices in which improve soil, reduce emissions, and increase resilience to drought could support the same production levels on closer to 2 million square kilometers. That would free over 1 million square kilometers of degraded land for forest recovery, without costing Brazil a single ton of beef exports. International funding mechanisms exist to make conservation economically competitive with clearing. The Amazon Fund, supported by Norway and Germany, has already demonstrated this model works at scale. None of this requires Brazil to choose between its economy and its forest. That is a false choice, constructed and maintained by the industries that benefit from keeping it in place. The path forward is technically straightforward. The barrier is not scientific, it is not economic, it is political, and politics, unlike a rainforest, can change direction overnight.